The cameras were live. Johnny Carson looked into John Wayne's eyes, heard his voice crack, and the professional mask he'd maintained for 23 years collapsed. May 1978. The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson. Studio 6B at NBC in Burbank. Another Monday night taping. The familiar rhythm, monologue, commercial break, first guest. America's bedtime ritual, polished to perfection over 2 decades of broadcasts. Johnny sat behind his wooden desk shuffling his blue cue cards, making small talk with Ed McMahon during the commercial break. The band was ready. The audience was buzzing. Everything was routine. Except tonight's guest was John Wayne. And nothing about tonight was routine. Wayne walked onto the stage to thunderous applause. At 71 years old, he still commanded a room like few men could. The audience stood. Johnny stood. Ed stood. This wasn't just a movie star. This was an American institution. But Johnny noticed something immediately. Something in Wayne's walk. A slight hesitation. A heaviness that hadn't been there 6 months ago during his last appearance. They shook hands. Wayne settled into the orange guest chair with a grunt that he tried to hide with a smile. Johnny sat back down, arranged his cards, smiled at the camera. "Duke," Johnny said, using Wayne's nickname the way he always did. "You look good." Wayne smiled that famous smile. "You're a terrible liar, Johnny. You always have been." The audience laughed, but there was something underneath the joke. Something both men knew but weren't saying. Cameras were live when Johnny Carson looked at John Wayne, heard the weight in his voice, and the professional mask he'd worn for 23 years began to crack. This was the final conversation between 2 American legends. They talked about Wayne's new film. About Hollywood. About the old days. Johnny kept it light, professional, exactly the way he'd conducted 10,000 interviews before this one. But his hands were different tonight. They moved to the cards, then away. Adjusted his tie. Touched the desk. Small tells that only people who knew Johnny well would notice. Ed McMahon noticed. He leaned forward slightly in his chair, watching his friend of 30 years show signs of something he almost never showed, nervousness. The band sat silent between segments. Doc Severinsen held his trumpet but didn't play the usual stings. Something about Wayne's presence tonight had changed the temperature in the studio. 15 minutes into the interview, Johnny asked a question he'd asked Wayne 100 times before. "So what's next for you, Duke? What's the next picture?" Wayne paused. Just for a second. But in television, a second is an eternity. "Johnny," Wayne said slowly, his voice carrying that distinctive drawl that had defined masculinity for 3 generations. "I think we should talk about something real for a minute." Johnny's smile faltered. "We don't have to." "No, I think we do." Wayne shifted in his chair. The audience, sensing something, went completely silent. "You know I've been sick." Carson stopped mid-sentence. The entire studio froze. The studio went from 300 people making ambient noise to absolute silence in less than 3 seconds. Every person in the audience understood that something significant was happening. Johnny put his cue cards down on the desk. His usual armor. He looked at Wayne, really looked at him, and saw what he'd been trying not to see since the moment Duke walked on stage. "How sick?" Johnny asked quietly. Wayne smiled sadly. "The kind of sick that makes a man think about what he wants to say while he can still say it." Johnny's jaw tightened. He glanced at the camera, then at the control room, then back at Wayne. Every instinct he had as a professional broadcaster told him to make a joke, lighten the mood, go to commercial. But something stronger overrode those instincts. "Duke," Johnny said, and his voice was different now. Not the host's voice, not the performance voice, but something raw and real. "Are you telling me this is, are you saying goodbye?" Wayne looked at him for a long moment. "I'm saying that if a man has friends, he ought to tell them what they mean to him while he still can." The control room erupted into chaos. Director Bobby Quinn was shouting into headsets. "Do we cut?" Someone tell me if we cut to commercial. Producer Fred DeCordova stood behind Bobby, watching the monitors, tears already streaming down his face. No, Fred said quietly. We keep rolling. Just keep rolling. On stage, Johnny had completely abandoned his cards. He leaned forward, elbows on his desk, looking at the man he'd known for 30 years. The man who'd been a guest on this show more than any other actor. The man who'd become a friend when friendship in Hollywood was rare. Johnny, Wayne continued, his voice steady but weighted with something final. I've been coming on this show since you started. 1962, 16 years. You know how many interviews I've done in my life? Thousands. You know how many of them mattered? Johnny shook his head slightly, unable to speak. About 6, Wayne said. And every single one of them was with you. Because you never treated me like John Wayne, the movie star. You treated me like Duke, your friend. And that's a rare thing. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. To understand what happened next, you need to understand what John Wayne and Johnny Carson meant to each other. And what this moment meant to America. They met in 1961, before Johnny even had The Tonight Show. Wayne was already a legend, 30 years of films, an icon of American masculinity, the embodiment of a certain type of strength that post-war America clung to. Johnny was the new kid trying to make it in television. Nervous, ambitious, not yet the smooth operator he'd become. Wayne had been a guest on one of Johnny's early variety shows, and instead of the stiff, formal interview both expected, something clicked. Wayne made Johnny laugh. Johnny made Wayne comfortable. They discovered they both loved magic tricks, both hated pretension, both understood that performance was exhausting and real friendship was rare. Over the years, as Johnny took over The Tonight Show and became the king of late-night television, Wayne became his most frequent guest. Not because Wayne needed the publicity. He was John Wayne. He didn't need anything from anyone. He came on because he liked Johnny. Trusted him. Felt safe with him. Wayne was there the night Johnny announced his divorce. He was there when Johnny's son died. He was there through all the personal chaos that Johnny kept hidden from America, providing the kind of steady, quiet friendship that both men needed but neither ever really acknowledged publicly. And Johnny had watched Wayne age. Watched the legendary strength start to fade. Watched the westerns give way to fewer roles, longer breaks between films. Watched Duke start to look tired. In early 1978, Wayne had been diagnosed with stomach cancer. The same disease that had killed his friend and director John Ford. Wayne had surgery. The doctors removed his stomach. Told him the prognosis wasn't good. Told him to get his affairs in order. Wayne had called Johnny personally to book this appearance. Not through publicists. Not through the show's bookers. He called Johnny's private line and said, "I'd like to come on the show one more time. If that's okay with you." Johnny had known immediately what "one more time" meant. But he'd said yes, of course he'd said yes, and he'd spent the week before the taping trying not to think about what this interview would really be. Backstage, he made a choice no producer would have ever allowed. Now, sitting across from Duke with the cameras rolling and America watching, Johnny couldn't pretend anymore. The professional mask was cracking. Ed McMahon, sitting beside him, had his hand over his mouth, fighting his own tears. "Duke," Johnny said, his voice thick. "You can't. We're not doing this. Not here. Not like this." Wayne smiled. "Where else would we do it? This is where we've had every important conversation for 16 years. Why would the last one be any different?" "Don't call it that," Johnny said sharply, and for a second the pain in his voice was so raw that several people in the audience started crying. Wayne reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small object. A silver money clip, worn smooth from years of use. "My father gave me this," Wayne said, holding it up. "He died when I was young. Didn't leave me much except this and some advice. He told me that a man's worth isn't measured by what he owns or what he does. It's measured by what he gives to the people around him when nobody's watching. He leaned forward and placed a money clip on Johnny's desk. You gave me something when nobody was watching, Johnny. You gave me respect. You gave me friendship. You gave me a place where I could just be Duke instead of John Wayne. And I wanted to give you something before I... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Johnny stared at the money clip. His hands were shaking. He picked it up, turned it over in his fingers, and when he looked back at Wayne, tears were streaming down his face. Johnny Carson, who had interviewed presidents and celebrities and maintained perfect composure through every crisis, who had made America laugh for 23 years without ever truly breaking character, was crying on live television. I can't accept this, Johnny whispered. You're going to, Wayne said firmly. And you're going to keep it. And when you're doing this show and some young actor comes on and you're tired and you don't want to be there, you're going to look at that clip and remember, the reason we do this isn't for the cameras. It's for the person sitting across from us who needs to be seen as human. The audience was openly weeping now. Doc Severinsen had tears running down his face. Ed McMahon had given up trying to hide his emotion and was wiping his eyes with his handkerchief. But this was the moment no one in the studio, nor anyone at home, ever saw coming. Johnny stood up from behind his desk. He never did this. The desk was his fortress, his protection, the barrier between Johnny the performer and Johnny the person. But he stood up, walked around it, and sat on the edge directly in front of Wayne. Duke, Johnny said, his voice barely controlled. You're the toughest man I've ever known. And if you can be this honest, then I can too. He looked directly into the camera, addressing America. This man, Johnny said, gesturing to Wayne, is my friend. Has been for nearly 20 years. And he's sick. Really sick. And instead of hiding that, instead of pretending everything's fine the way we always do in this business, he's sitting here telling the truth. Because that's who he is. That's who he's always been. Johnny turned back to Wayne. And the truth is, I don't know how to do this show without knowing you're out there. Without knowing that every few months you'll come back and remind me why this matters. Wayne reached out and gripped Johnny's shoulder. You're going to be fine, Johnny. You're going to do this show for another decade. You're going to make millions of people laugh. And when you finally decide to hang it up, you're going to remember that you gave an old cowboy a place to be real. They sat like that for a moment. Two American icons, dropping all pretense, letting the world see what friendship looked like when it was facing mortality. Then Wayne smiled. Now help me up. This damn chair is too low and my back's killing me. The tension broke. Johnny laughed through his tears. The audience laughed. Wayne stood, Johnny helped him, and for just a second, everything felt normal again. But it wasn't normal. And everyone knew it. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. The show went to commercial. As soon as they were off air, Johnny hugged Wayne. Really hugged him. The kind of embrace that says everything words can't. You take care of yourself, Johnny said. I'll try, Wayne said. But Johnny, listen to me. When I'm gone, don't you dare make me into some kind of saint. Just remember the laughs. Remember the friend. Johnny nodded, unable to speak. John Wayne died 13 months later, in June 1979. Johnny didn't talk about it on the show. He couldn't. But that night, he taped a segment that never aired, just him, alone on the empty stage, holding that silver money clip, saying goodbye to the camera the way he wished he'd said goodbye to Duke. The money clip stayed in Johnny's desk drawer for the rest of his career. Every night for 14 more years, before every show, he'd touch it once. A reminder. A promise kept. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. After Johnny retired in 1992, he donated the clip to the Smithsonian with one condition: display it next to a photograph of that final interview. Today they sit together, A silver money clip and an image of two legends who taught America that strength isn't hiding your heart. It's showing it when it matters most. The interview aired unedited. 50 million people watched two friends say goodbye. And television was never quite the same.